Here he is, one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, TSN Hockey Insider, and our Wednesday regular, Mr. Darren Dreger. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. You know, it's closing in on the week, obviously leading up to the NHL Draft. So more trade speculation and lots of discussions among NHL general managers. What I don't get a full handle on is whether or not anybody is in a position where they're poised to act. They keep saying there's appetite to act, but you know, when you get this close to the draft, that's not unusual, right? I mean, the temperature is elevating, but it's not at a point where you feel 100% certain this is the best move you're going to make, unless you're Danny Briere and the Philadelphia Flyers. And then, you know, he's proven already as a young GM that he's not afraid to pull the trigger. So I think it's more about the swirling effect of the conversation and the discussions at this point.
But before we get to the tidbits here, is this calendar here to stay? Are we going to see the draft up against free agency like this going forward, do you think? Or are we still sort of in that transition process out of COVID where it'll be bumped back a week again?
That's a good question. No, I don't think so. They've worked pretty hard to get to a place where they're back on point with the calendar. So I don't have any indication to suggest. Sorry, fellas. Yep. That's going to change moving forward. So they like the position that they're in, and it's all systems go according to head office.
And in midweek draft, do you think that's a thing to stay as well here, Wednesday, Thursday, rather than the traditional Friday, Saturday as we come to?
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason they like it is they can contain all of it into that week, right? Yeah. And you're not crossing, you know, the continent in certain situations because you've got the NHL awards to start the week, followed by everything else around the draft. So in fairness, I haven't asked that question about whether or not, you know, they're going to continue to embrace the Wednesday, Thursday draft. I happen to love it. Mm-hmm. I think it's a wonderful thing, other than the fact that we're flying back on Friday from Nashville, and then we have July 1st free agent frenzy on Saturday, which is going to complicate things a little bit. But I don't know. I think most people are just happy that they're back to the calendar, as I talked about, and July 1st remains a marker. So jam as much as you can in the week leading up to free agent frenzy, and everybody can get on with whatever their summer looks like.
If I know anything about Nashville, there are going to be some sore feet and some closed eyelids on that flight Friday.
Not for this guy, man. I've been there and I've done that, and I just turned 55, and no.
Unless you're not making it to Tootsie's? Come on, you got to make it to Tootsie's.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, but I've been there dozens of times, and I'm not bragging. That's just a fact. And I just feel like this stage of my life, unless I'm chasing a story at 11 p.m., I'm probably better served to be in the wrapper and getting freshened up for the next day.
Crisp hotel sheets is just as much of a lure as
sure.
100% right.
Yeah,
right. When you're looking forward to the heavenly bed as opposed to the activities outside.
Exactly.
Dregs, all indications heading up to last week from yourself and others were just skeptical the Aquilinis would greenlight a buyout of OEL.
Yeah.
How surprised were you when the news came down on Friday? And what do you know about the process that led them to that decision?
Well, I think I was as surprised as Oliver Eckman Larson was. I think the camp made it abundantly clear they did not expect that was coming. They knew that it was a possibility, and that's just not just because of wider spread media speculation, not necessarily targeting OEL, but I think loosely we all kind of talked about if you're looking at targets of buyout from the Vancouver Canucks, who might they be? And Oliver Eckman Larson's name was out there in that sense, but doesn't sound like they were given much of any indication that this was the path that they were going to take. So what it tells me, given what we know of most ownership groups, and in this case, the Aquilinis, who just don't want anything to do with dead money, they realize that the money saved on the contract and the freedom that it creates by generating cap space is, in the long run and in the short term, perhaps going to make the Vancouver Canucks that much better, which also translates into dollars. I mean, if they're as competitive and as potentially a playoff contending team as they want and expect to be through the ads this offseason, then you're not so worried about the buyout numbers that are attached here to Oliver Ekman Larson. And it also tells you that management exhausted all the trade scenarios pretty much, right? Not to say that Patrick Allvin can't pull something out of the hat in the days ahead here in Nashville. But for management to convince the Aquilinis that, okay, there's no guarantee we're going to be able to do this, and here are the roster needs that we need, so why don't we move forward with a buyout? And if we can create additional cap space via trade, then we'll do that too. I think they had to exhaust all of that to get to the final decision.
And I think we talked about this with you before it even happened, and certainly in the aftermath, we can look back. Maybe the Minnesota Wild were that case study for Patrick Allvin, that they survived, they remained somewhat competitive despite two pretty massive, almost grotesque-sized buyouts, and they're still paying the price. The Minnesota Wild are, but they seem to be still in a competitive window despite those buyouts.
That has to be Exhibit A, right? And it's not like Craig Leopold, the owner of the Minnesota Wild, enjoys paying people that no longer play for his team. I mean, it'd be ludicrous to suggest that he was on board. Billy Garen had to do a sales job and convinced him that for the greater good, that was the right approach. And I think the proof is, as they say, in the pudding. Now, the season didn't end the way the Minnesota Wild were hoping. You know, Garen, I think, would still like to shake things up and maybe hit his core a little bit. We'll see in the days ahead. But it did prove to other owners that sometimes, as distasteful as it is, you've got to go down this path. But that cuts both ways. You know, if things had gone differently and the Minnesota Wild had failed miserably last season, and all of a sudden, you know, ticket sales are dropping considerably, guess what's happening? Craig Leopold is bringing Bill Garen into the office and saying, this didn't work and it's on you. That's the reality of the business, right? So that probably applies to the Canucks management here as well.
Thank you, Kirill Kaprizov. Thank you, Elias Pettersson, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, now let's give the benefit of the doubt to Allvin and to Jimmy Rutherford. We know what their needs are. You know, we've talked about it pretty much weekly on the segment. You know, they keep looking for that third line center. We know they want a penalty kill shutdown defenseman. And if it's available, and it probably will be through free agency, they'd really like to add a big, tough winger. And not for purposes of fighting, just because, as we saw in the Stanley Cup final, you know, the bigger teams traditionally have been better, right? I mean, you cover more ice. You need that physicality that we saw the Florida Panthers play through the postseason with, and then they just ran into the injury wall against the Vegas Golden Knights. So those are pretty significant needs, you know? So, you know, they're not all going to be realized through trade. And I don't happen to love the free agent market, but there are some interesting pieces that will get the attention of the Canucks.
Last week, you told us about Scott Laughton, the Philadelphia center, who's on the block and apparently drawing some interest. Do you know who they may target on defense, Dregs?
I don't, but it's an intriguing market, isn't it, when you look around, right? You know, Brett Pesce's name has been out there, but I think Carolina's trying to reel that one back in. I mean, their preference is to sign Brett Pesce. You know,
no
it's
pun intended, huh?
Yeah. Yes.
Reel him back in. Well phrased.
Yeah. You know, beyond that, you know, you look at Noah Hanifin, of course, who's potentially available from the Calgary Flames. You know, here's a defenseman that's kind of gone under the radar. We've just kind of forgotten about him since the trade deadline, and that's Joel Edmundson from the Montreal Canadiens. And I think that he'll be attractive because of the player that he is. But again, you've got a short term. So there's no long-term buy-in on Joel Edmundson. You know, does he move the needle? I don't know. And again, I'm just scraping the surface here of some of the potential guys that are in play. And there will be a vast number of players that are getting consideration. You know, Travis Sanheim, the Philadelphia Flyers, is a name that has kind of surfaced of late. I put Sanheim in the same grouping of Scott Laughton and Travis Konechny. You know, if you're Danny Briere, of course you have to listen. But if you're acquiring that piece, it's because the deal is too good for a rebuilding organization to back away from. So maybe the Vancouver Canucks have the magic package here to make a bigger deal happen.
Back on the Canucks, poor Ethan Bear gets hurt at the World, shoulder surgery. He's going to be out till perhaps mid-December or something like that, Dregs. An RFA with a, was it 2.2 qualifying offer?
Yeah.
But of course, not a lot of leverage now, and we're wondering, is this now a player the Canucks walk away from because of the injury, or are you hearing anything on Ethan Bear with the Canucks?
Well, the only thing I've heard, and it's literally minutes ago, is that there's no certainty one way or another, and that's more coming from the players' side of this. Obviously, there's an appetite from Ethan Bear's perspective to link in longer term with the Vancouver Canucks, whatever that term might be. He felt comfortable there. He played good hockey for the Vancouver Canucks. Scary injury. An injury, as the Canucks have disclosed, is going to keep him out for months. So maybe there's some reservation there. But, Vancouver needs defense. And they know this guy. As long as there's a common ground and Ethan Bear isn't trying to move the needle financially here, there could be a spot for him, but it's still too soon to say, and nothing that I would suggest is on the front burner to lead us to a place where we can say, no, it's more likely he signs versus there isn't going to be a deal there for him.
Canucks or not Canucks, is there any defenseman out there that you find it surprising that might be available? Like you didn't think that he would be available. Like is a Gerard really truly available? Anybody like that?
Well, every year we look at the Colorado Avalanche and we wonder which of those defensemen are finally going to pop into the market, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we thought that after they won the Stanley Cup and then some of the retooling that they were going to have to go through, and yet they managed to maintain them. So I guess I wouldn't be overly surprised when I look at Sam Girard, but I would wonder what the Avalanche are targeting that needs to come back the other way. I guess if I'm looking at defense, I'm looking at the Columbus Blue Jackets because they seem to be hoarding good defense right now. So is it, one of their younger guys? Is it a more experienced defenseman? There are some names that we have on our trade bait graphics and whatnot. If you look at the deeper list, not the top 10, it feels like Jarmo is going to do more. And maybe he's just waiting to get the Babcock contract solidified once his deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs expires at the end of this month, and then they get into the more heavier lifting. But I'd keep an eye on Columbus and what they might do there.
Okay, let me just run down the list, and you tell me the guy you think most likely to be traded. Erik Karlsson, Noah Hanifin, Brett Pesce, Parayko and Falk in St. Louis, Grzelcyk and Forbert in Boston, Girard. Which name out there you think has got the most activity, is most likely to be dealt?
Well, I mean, we talked a bit about Brett Pesce. There's no short of interest in him, but Vancouver or Carolina would also very much like to extend him. This is always the dance we seem to go through with Carolina Hurricanes players. And I admire the way Tom Dunnan has come into the National Hockey League in his approach, because he gets stuff done and he gets contracts and players on good value. Noah Hanifin is curious to me. There's a lot of buzz around him, as there should be. And I think Hanifin is just trying to decide where is the best fit for him. Not necessarily a team that they've identified. That's up to Pat Brisson and CAA Hockey to figure out. Is it time for him to move out of Calgary? Does he feel like that's in his best interest? And, the way that you encourage that is by doing what Pierre-Luc Dubois and others have done and simply telling your organization you're not going to sign. That's the reason why Hanifin's name is out there, right? Is because, they're not sure they want to commit full-time, long-term to the Calgary Flames. If he's actually legit in play, I'd put Sanheim into that category as well. I like Travis Sanheim. I think he'd be a real good fit and a nice ad for a team.
Yeah, big contract there, a lot of term, but if you like him, that may be viewed as a benefit. And look, here's the thing: when you talk about Carolina, boy, Dregs, when Dundon came into the league, I think we all had our concerns because he was so swashbuckling.
Yeah.
You look at that organization now; they're a courage of their conviction organization. They got an identity that might be the most pronounced in the National Hockey League. players they believe in. They move on early and get them signed up long term. They draft and develop beautifully.
Yeah.
I mean, and $24 million in cap space, gentlemen, for a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm not sure there's a team that's better positioned.
Which is why we had them penciled in for a JT Miller trade way back when.
Yeah.
But let's just address that goes to because we still get feedback in on social and in our inbox about JT Miller trades. That's not happening anymore, right? Like from any sides, the JT Miller's not getting traded before July 1st, right?
No. Well, look, and I think you automatically in our business you have to couch everything and just state that anything is possible. If somebody steps up and it's just beyond belief, then I guess they have to consider it. But I mean, I stated a long time ago with you guys that as soon as Rick Tocchet came in, he identified JT Miller as the obvious, a very competitive player. Although if you can bridle the energy of JT Miller and the emotion of JT Miller, you're going to have something that is, if not unique, it's special. And I think that Tocchet was able to do that over the course of the season from the point he took over. And I think there'd be a real unhappy head coach in Vancouver if all of a sudden this guy got moved.
Great word, bridle. Boy, he hit us with real Pesce, bridle Miller. It's on his game. It's the offseason. It's Darren Dreger, our Wednesday NHL Insider. Thank you for this, my friend. We'll catch up next week.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
Tackle all the hills with ease and don't arrive at work all sweaty. Get around the city on electric transportation that fits your lifestyle and get it at bestbuy.ca.